I want you to think about a time, and look, we all have one, when you tried to fundamentally change a habit.
Oh, yeah. Everyone has that one thing they keep trying to fix.
Right. Maybe you were aiming for this, like, massive, life-altering goal.
Mhm.
You bought the books, you set the alarms, you white-knuckled your way through the first couple of weeks, and then you just snapped.
Like a rubber band.
Exactly, like a rubber
Yeah.
band stretched way past its limit. You just shot right back into your old self.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly frustrating. And honestly, it just leaves you feeling exhausted. You start to internalize it, assuming, I guess I just don't have the grit required for this.
And that assumption is just so pervasive. We carry this immense guilt, thinking we just didn't push hard enough, or, I don't know, that our willpower is somehow defective.
Yeah, totally.
But that cycle of trying so hard, failing, and then punishing yourself, that is precisely what keeps people trapped for decades.
Which is exactly why today we are doing a deep dive to decode why relying on that kind of brute force simply does not work. We're pulling from a really fascinating body of research by Dr. Carlton Johnson.
Yes, produced by the Spectrix Metaphysical Institute.
Right, as part of a series they did called Perspectives by Spectrix, they explore the hidden architecture of what they term the mechanics of becoming.
Yeah.
And the core premise uniting all of this material is that transformation isn't about force. It is about achieving internal coherence.
The internal coherence, that is the critical concept here, because the research essentially argues that we've been given the completely wrong tools for change.
How so? Like, what are we getting wrong?
Well, we approach human behavior as if it were a purely logical system. But the frameworks Dr. Johnson outlines, specifically there's Spectrix OS, Spectrix Forever, and the VIBRA model, they prove that treating behavior as a logic puzzle is, well, it's the very first reason we fail right out of the gate.
Right. I mean, we sit down with a notebook and we basically write an equation like, I want to be out of debt, so I will simply stop spending money on takeout.
Exactly.
Or I want to be healthier, so I will wake up at 5 a.m. and run. A plus B equals C. It makes perfect logical sense on paper.
On paper, sure, but the source material highlights that human behavior is fundamentally driven by emotion and survival mechanics, not logic.
Right.
When you look at stubborn patterns, things like stress eating, withdrawing from your relationships, or working yourself into clinical burnout, we tend to view those as just random acts of weakness.
Yeah, we judge ourselves so harshly for them.
We really do. But Spectrix OS frames these behaviors as emotional return.
Emotional return. Okay, so like a return on an investment your nervous system made a long time ago?
That's a great way to put it. Think about your nervous system as this highly efficient threat detection algorithm. Its whole job is to prioritize immediate relief over your, 10-year goals.
It doesn't care about your marathon. It just wants you safe right now.
Exactly. It logs exactly what actions brought you safety or soothing in the past. So if 10 years ago, eating an entire pizza after a brutal day at work gave your nervous system a temporary biochemical flood of comfort.
Your body cataloged that.
Yes. So now, a decade later, when you experience that specific flavor of workplace stress, your nervous system basically bypasses your prefrontal cortex entirely.
It skips the logical brain.
Completely. It automatically drives you toward that behavior because it predicts that action will yield the emotional return of safety. What's fascinating here is that it happens before you even have a chance to think about it.
Wow. Even if the behavior is completely destructive to what you consciously want today. Like, your logical brain is saying, hey, we're trying to run a marathon this year. But your nervous system is saying, we are just trying to survive this Tuesday, and I have the blueprint for how to do it.
That disconnect right there perfectly explains the catastrophic failure of standard insight-based self-help.
Oh, because we put insight on a pedestal, don't we?
We do. We assume that if you can just, understand the root cause of a trigger or identify your childhood trauma, the bad habit will just evaporate.
Right, like awareness is a cure.
But insight alone is remarkably weak. You can have absolute clarity on exactly why you self-sabotage, but awareness leaves the deep physiological pattern completely untouched, unless there is what Dr. Johnson calls emotional recalibration.
Okay, so is insight without emotional recalibration basically like seeing your car's check engine light come on? Like, you're aware there is a problem, but just staring at the light on the dashboard doesn't actually fix the engine.
I like that, but let's actually upgrade that analogy a bit because a check engine light is almost too passive.
Okay, upgrade it for me.
It's more like you are a pilot fighting an automated flight system. Your insight is your hands gripping the manual controls, trying to pull the plane up, but the autopilot, which is your nervous system, is literally programmed to dive to a certain altitude whenever it detects turbulence.
Oh, wow. So you're fighting the machine.
You are. You can be fully aware the plane is diving, you can scream about the plane diving, but until you reprogram the autopilot's code, you are going to be fighting the machinery until your arms literally give out. In the Spectrix Forever framework, true change requires decoupling the destructive behavior from that feeling of relief.
Okay, so how do we actually execute that decoupling? Because the material makes it clear we have to shift the emotional meaning attached to the pattern. But practically speaking, how do you teach a nervous system that a bad habit no longer equals safety?
Well, you don't do it by just taking the bad habit away. You do it by introducing a competing neural pathway.
Competing pathway, meaning what exactly?
It means you have to actively supply the nervous system with a new action that provides an equivalent or hopefully superior sense of safety.
Oh, so you can't just leave a vacuum.
Right. If you just try to block the stress eating or, say, the procrastination without giving the system a new way to process the cortisol, the pressure just builds until the system overrides you anyway.
So where do you start?
You start by observing the trigger without immediately acting. You create this tiny micropause. And in that pause, you introduce a new, healthy, self-regulating behavior. Over time, through neuroplasticity, the brain wires this new behavior to the feeling of relief, and the old pathway essentially just starves to death. It loses its emotional payoff.
Okay, but if we can't just logic our way out of this, and our nervous system is actively fighting us, I mean, what's our usual cultural answer? It's discipline, right?
Oh, always. Just grind it out.
Exactly. Hustle harder.
Yeah.
But this research takes a massive swing at the whole concept of discipline. It argues that we completely misunderstand what consistency actually is.
It's a very sharp critique of hustle culture, honestly, because we tend to equate consistency entirely with discipline. We think that if you are just, strict enough with yourself, you'll be consistent.
But the source disagrees.
Completely. Dr. Johnson's research states that discipline without reinforcement inevitably collapses. You simply cannot sustainably force yourself to execute a behavior that your internal machinery is actively resisting.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because let me play the skeptic on behalf of the listener. We always hear, just do it. But the material argues that sheer willpower creates what the VIBRA model calls a fragmented system. What is actually fragmenting there?
A fragmented system is when the different layers of your existence are moving in conflicting directions. VIBRA suggests that true, sustainable action requires 4 specific things to align: your identity, your emotion, your environment, and your behavior.
Okay, identity, emotion, environment, behavior. Give me an example of those clashing.
Sure. Imagine you want to become someone who sets firm boundaries at work. That's your target behavior. But internally, your emotion is terrified of the rejection that might come with saying no.
Right, you're scared they'll fire you or hate you.
Exactly. And to make it worse, your environment is this hyper-competitive office that penalizes boundaries. In this state, your system is heavily fragmented.
Yeah, your behavior is trying to step forward, but your emotions and your environment have you in an absolute chokehold, just pulling you backward. No wonder it feels physically exhausting. You're burning through all your daily energy reserves just managing that internal friction.
Which is exactly why the failure isn't a lack of discipline. It's a structural failure. When those 4 elements move together, they create internal coherence. And coherence mathematically reduces resistance.
But wait, let me push back slightly on the environment piece, just on behalf of everyone listening who might be in a tough spot. What if a listener is stuck in an environment they can't immediately change, say a toxic workplace where they really need the paycheck, or a complicated family dynamic? Doesn't this directive to, quote, design environmental alignment just become another exhausting thing on their to-do list? Like, great, now I have to fix my toxic boss before I can change my own habits.
That's a vital distinction to make, and it's actually a very common misinterpretation of alignment. The Spectrix research does not demand overnight macro-environmental perfection.
Okay, so what do you do if you can't quit the toxic job?
If you can't quit, you don't focus on the macro environment. Instead, you ruthlessly align your microenvironment.
Microenvironment, give me an example of that.
A microenvironment is the immediate physical and sensory space that you do control. So it's putting on noise-canceling headphones with a specific frequency of music right before you open an overwhelming inbox.
Oh, I see.
Or it's changing your computer passwords to a phrase that reinforces your goals. It's taking your lunch break in your car instead of the break room, just to completely reset your nervous system.
So you can't control the chaotic company culture, but you can systematically reduce the friction in your immediate 3-foot radius.
Exactly. You repeat those tiny alignments, shrinking the resistance step by step, rather than trying to punch your way through a brick wall. It's about designing alignment repeatedly until the new pattern just becomes natural.
It's like focusing on removing the pebbles from your shoes so you can actually survive the hike.
That's exactly it.
So once we start removing that internal resistance and getting those pieces aligned, what actually powers the engine of change? Because if willpower is a finite resource, what's the renewable energy source? And the sources reveal a pretty surprising truth here. Energy follows identity.
This is arguably the most transformative idea within the Spectrix Forever framework, because we are so conditioned to view identity as a purely psychological construct.
Right, just a narrative, like a story we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
I am a shy person, or I am an ambitious person.
Right, but Dr. Johnson's research proves that identity is not just psychological. It is fundamentally energetic and physiological. Your internal self-concept literally dictates how your body allocates physical resources.
Okay, I really want to make sure I understand the mechanism here. The source details how a person's self-concept physically alters their posture, their vitality, their emotional resilience. How does the thought about who I am actually change my physical endurance?
Let's look at how the nervous system evaluates a challenge. If a person unconsciously identifies as defeated, perhaps their core internal narrative is, I always mess things up, or everything is a struggle.
Yeah, a lot of us have that tape playing.
Right. Well, their physiology actually mirrors that identity. So when faced with a complex task, the brain, which is operating on this assumption of inevitable failure, decides it's just not worth burning valuable glucose and oxygen.
Wait, really? It cuts off the fuel?
Yes. It restricts the energy supply. Their posture literally slumps. Their breathing becomes shallow. They feel profound fatigue, not because they are physically exhausted from the work, but because their brain has preemptively shut down resource allocation.
But if they shift that identity,
If they identify as capable, the entire biochemical cascade reverses. The nervous system perceives the exact same complex task, not as an insurmountable threat, but as an executable challenge.
oh, wow.
Because the identity is, I can handle this, the brain floods the system with the energy required to see it through. The heart rate optimizes, posture straightens, and behavioral endurance spikes. The external hurdle is identical, but because the internal identity shifted, the physiological energy available to tackle it completely transformed.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this completely reframes our cultural obsession with motivation. We treat motivation like it's the holy grail.
Totally. Watch a hype video, read a quote, pump yourself up.
Exactly. But listening to this, if motivation is like a shot of espresso, a temporary jolt that inevitably wears off, then identity is like getting 8 hours of deep sleep. It's the underlying foundation that actually sustains you.
That is the perfect distinction. Motivation is an external force that you inject into a system to artificially override it. It is fundamentally unsustainable.
It's pushing a heavy boulder up a steep hill. Eventually, gravity wins.
Right. The source material is explicit. Temporary motivation fades. Identity, on the other hand, is the operating system itself. Changing your identity isn't pushing the boulder, it's subtly tilting the axis of the hill itself.
So the boulder eventually just starts rolling in the right direction on its own.
Exactly. When you change the internal self, the external pattern gains long-term stability simply because humans rarely sustain behaviors that conflict with their core identity.
Okay, so we have all these interconnected pieces now. The emotional threat detection of the nervous system, the friction of a fragmented environment, the physiological energy driven by identity. But how do these actually interact in our day-to-day lives, like on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Well, they aren't isolated concepts. The Spectrix OS framework maps this out as a continuous living feedback loop.
Right, an ecosystem you interact with every single day. Let's make this incredibly concrete for the listener. How does this cycle actually cascade step by step in real time? Walk me through a scenario of someone trapped in this loop.
Let's invent a character to trace this. We'll call him David. David wants to write a book, but he hasn't written a word in 6 months.
Okay, poor David.
Right. So we start at the top of the Spectrix OS integration cycle. Thoughts. David is sitting at his desk, and he thinks, I don't have enough time, and my writing probably isn't good anyway.
Which instantly triggers the next phase, which is emotions.
Exactly. That thought isn't just a sentence in his head. It signals his amygdala to produce the actual emotion of anxiety and inadequacy. And that emotion immediately cascades into the third phase, physiology.
So his body gets involved.
Yes. David's body reacts to the anxiety. His breathing gets shallow, cortisol hits his bloodstream, and his chest physically tightens up. He is now in a state of mild physiological distress.
And because his nervous system is now in distress, it demands an emotional return, like we talked about earlier. It needs safety. Which brings us to phase 4, behavior.
Exactly. To escape the physical discomfort of that cortisol, David minimizes his word processor and he opens social media. He scrolls for 45 minutes.
Getting that dopamine hit.
Right, the temporary relief. But then we hit phase 5, which is the trap, identity. David realizes he just wasted an hour. His brain looks at his behavior and updates his identity. It essentially says, see, I am a procrastinator. I'm not a real writer.
And as we just discussed, energy follows identity. So phase 7 is energy.
Yes. Because David now identifies in this moment as a failing procrastinator, his brain restricts his resources. He feels sluggish, heavy, and deeply tired.
Which leads to the final phase.
Right. Phase 7, perception. Because he is physically drained, his perception of the world literally darkens. The idea of writing now looks even more impossible than it did an hour ago, which triggers more negative thoughts, and the cycle just repeats, digging the trench deeper every single time.
Wow. Okay, so thoughts affect emotions. Emotions affect physiology. Physiology affects behavior. Behavior reinforces identity. Identity influences energy. And energy shapes perception. That is, honestly, it's terrifying because it's a closed loop. But I assume it can spin the other way, right?
It absolutely can, and that is the core mechanism of the VIBRA model. You have to consciously interrupt the cycle. If David forces a micropause when that anxiety hits, and instead of scrolling social media, he writes just one single sentence, even a terrible one, the behavior changes.
And that changes the identity.
Exactly. The behavior signals a new identity. I am someone who writes even when it's hard. That identity frees up a tiny bit more energy, which brightens his perception, which leads to slightly better thoughts tomorrow. If we connect this to the bigger picture, because every repeated action strengthens something, you have to ask yourself, what are you actually strengthening? Are you reinforcing the version of yourself you want to become, or the one you are trying to leave behind?
So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's bring all the pieces together by explicitly spelling out the VIBRA acronym so they can take it with them. Let's start with V.
The V stands for vision. This isn't just a mood board. This means your nervous system requires a concrete destination to aim for beyond your current identity.
Right, seeing beyond the current identity. Because if you don't have a vivid blueprint of who you are becoming, the autopilot just defaults to the old coordinates.
Exactly. Then the I is integration. This is the hard work of aligning your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior, and your environment, both macro and micro. It's systematically removing the contradictions between them.
Got it. The R is reinforced action. And it deliberately does not say disciplined action.
No, it doesn't. It means repeating the behaviors that support your future self, not through sheer willpower, but by designing an environment and emotional state where those actions become the path of least resistance.
And finally, the B and A stand for balanced resonance alignment. Stop there, actually, because resonance sounds a bit abstract. What does that actually mean in a psychological sense?
Well, in physics, resonance occurs when two frequencies match, which amplifies the overall energy. In the Spectrix framework, balanced resonance alignment means your nervous system's drive for safety, your conscious goals, and your environmental cues are all operating at the exact same frequency.
Oh, so they aren't fighting each other.
Right. There is no destructive interference. You aren't burning energy fighting yourself. You are in a state of sustained, effortless momentum.
You know, looking at transformation through Dr. Johnson's research is honestly an incredible relief. Because if you're listening to this and you feel like you are pushing that boulder up the hill every single day and you are just exhausted, the ultimate takeaway is that the issue isn't a lack of effort. You're not lazy. The issue is simply a lack of coherence.
Exactly. We have so heavily romanticized the struggle, we think that if it doesn't hurt, we aren't growing. But this research proves that when your identity, your energy, and your environment actually lock into place, change stops feeling like a war.
It stops feeling forced.
Right. Becoming that new version of yourself actually begins to feel completely natural.
We've broken down how this living ecosystem operates and how every tiny behavior is a vote for an identity within that continuous loop. So I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder on your own today. We've talked about how every repeated action strengthens an identity. So I want you to think about the most mundane, automatic habit you have. Maybe it's the very first instinctual movement you make when you reach over to turn off your morning alarm clock. Based on this biological feedback loop, what specific future version of yourself is that tiny, invisible 3-second action quietly reinforcing? Are you stretching that rubber band to inevitably snap back to the old you, or are you finally beginning to tilt the hill?